Well, as we speak today, obviously the conference of the parties is not yet over, so a lot of negotiations are actually happening over the next few days. But I think what you saw already on day one is a remarkably fast translation of a decision taken at the previous conference of the parties in Sharm el-Sheikh, namely to establish a loss and damage fund. In Dubai, less than 12 months later, the parties to the convention adopted this decision. The fund is essentially established, and $700 million were pledged. So, to those who say that the climate convention cannot move things, I would say, well, here is an example of bringing 190 plus nations together, taking a decision in principle, adopting it a year later, and now resourcing the fund. What I think for Africa in particular will remain a challenge is that climate change is both a threat and an opportunity. So far, Africa is really at the forefront of the threat. And I think the question is whether in the world now moving to a low carbon, decarbonized future, can Africa move from, in a sense, an adopter of technologies developed elsewhere to really being a frontline player in this transition to a greener economy, whether it's in the power sector, in the transport sector, agriculture sector. And that is really where these COPs and negotiations matter, because if the financing, if the access to technology, if the partnerships and the willingness of those who have polluted the atmosphere over the last 100 years are not co-investing, it is very difficult for African economies to make these investments now that would allow it to really be the continent where green technologies and, in a sense, a green transition soon will be at the forefront of what happens in the world.
Right. And I want to pick back or move back onto some of the statements we had from African leaders who are speaking at COP28. We had President of Tanzania, of the United Republic of Tanzania, Her Excellency Samia Suluhu, who actually said that unfulfilled commitments erode solidarity and trust and have a detrimental consequences, particularly for developing nations. This she was actually referring to the big commitments that are usually made on such platforms, which actually go unfulfilled. What has been the missing link on this fulfillment of these commitments?
Let me first of all say Her Excellency the President of Tanzania is right. And I think this is part of the challenge we now face as head of the United Nations Development Programme, who works in over 150 countries on climate change support programs every day across the world. We have exactly the same take. We are not able to deploy resources that have been promised in order to enable rapid transitions to happen. Countries have to overcome enormous obstacles, despite the fact that there is finance in the world, but it is not coming to Africa. And I think in that sense, we do need to tackle these issues head on. Part of that has to do also with readiness on the continent. We have sometimes very old power sector legislation. It needs to be reformed. We need to look at financial markets and the incentives also, for instance, in tax policies. If you want clean technology to come in, we have $7 trillion, according to the IMF, currently in subsidies for fossil fuels worldwide. We have to correct for that. Tax breaks for solar, for electric vehicles. Those are the kinds of policies, first of all, that can come from within a country. But if the financing is not available, the technology is not accessible, then the world is failing the promise that it has made, particularly to developing countries. Much of our attention as UNDP today is really to support developing countries in changing that equation.
Right. And I want to also pick up on another statement that came up. President Ruto of Kenya actually did mention that we are in this mess because of energy, fossil fuel. And of course, he actually goes ahead to say that it is the same energy that will get us out of it. And he actually attributes this to the richness of renewable energy across the African continent. How do you ensure, from where you sit, that the continent does not miss this opportunity that it has to actually fix, the challenge through the enormous, renewable resources or energy that it holds?
First of all, by acknowledging that every country is its own best protector of its national interests. Don't wait for others to decide whether you can or cannot do something. If you look at Kenya's economy today, it produces well over 90% of its electricity with renewables. This is not by accident. This is a 25, 30-year process of deliberately investing in a different form of energy security, energy independence. Having geothermal, wind, and now solar will enable, as President Ruto put it at the African Climate Summit a few months ago, for Africa perhaps to be the first continent where industrialization will happen because of a green transition. And I think this is a very significant part of understanding what will drive this change. Now, obviously, again, policy, investments, and the transition to different approaches in industrialization, energy production, are at the core of Africa not being itself just a victim. It is very much today, I think, the sense across the continent that decisions can be made today that first of all address fundamentally the need and necessity of access to clean and affordable energy. Or you could even say, let's just focus on access to affordable energy. The fact that affordable and clean today are in fact two positives that reinforce each other is also an explanation why we're now seeing across the continent so many new frontiers opening up on renewable energy infrastructure, including on another element, which is green hydrogen. And I think it is the combination of these that allows precisely the kind of energy model to emerge that many Africans, I think, are looking at today as either something that we can manage or that is beyond our reach.
Right. Before I let you go, the clean energy transition is a conversation that I'm sure even as we talk, we still also, it's a cross-cutting issue. But the transition has to be just. And of course, this particular transition is also colliding, with the different interests and the different needs of the particular developing nations.
Yes.
How do we ensure, as developing nations that are really in need of these transitions, get the proper sort of support to be able to deliver this transition in a just way?
Well, just transitions can apply, first of all, within the country. If we only focus on the urban areas and the cities, we neglect the rural economy. That applies as much to access to energy as it is, for example, to digital infrastructure in today's world, where digital should not only be something that is accessible to those who live in the city, it could be equally transformative in the rural economy. Then we have a just transition between the industrialized and the developing world, between those who have a historical responsibility for carbon emissions and those who are becoming the biggest emitters in today's world also. This is still a very difficult issue to negotiate because it does come down to financing, although I would argue that very often at the international level we have set up this discussion in the wrong way. The industrialized world believes that there is nothing being done in the developing world. It's a myth. We know that. In fact, the developing world is spending multiples today already on green energy, on green mobility, than the industrialized world. The negotiations in the Climate Change Convention, but also in the G20 and other fora, are now about how much is, let's say, the richer world willing to co-invest with the global south, with the developing world, in accelerating these transitions. Climate change will hurt everyone. The problem is too many people are still hiding behind the profitable economy of today and yesterday at the expense of tomorrow's economies, particularly developing country economies. This is why financing has become such a central piece of this. It's not all about the money, but without addressing the money issue, you are not going to be able to make the transitions, and most importantly, just transitions. And that is where you erode confidence, you erode the ability to cooperate, and particularly at this moment in time, climate change may be one of the few issues where literally every citizen in every country across the world has a shared interest to work with their neighbor, with their neighboring country, and with the world community.
Yeah, but there have been drums being sounded by African leaders on the need to actually adjust and repurpose the financing model,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
that, ranges from the international financial institutions, the international financial architecture. It's all very well to say, let's increase the lending of the World Bank and other international multilateral development banks. It's still asking Africa to borrow money in order to do something that it is not really within its own means just to do alone. We need to look also at access to capital markets. We need to look at the discrimination that we see in many international financial markets towards pricing risk on the African continent. A lot of what UNDP today does is trying to address this issue of risk finance and looking at how the latest actuarial science can also inform financial markets better so that we lower the price of borrowing in order to be able to invest in transitions in the economy of tomorrow from all aspects, technology, through energy, through mobility.
Finally, you've been meeting several people across Rwanda in your visit while you're here. You've also met the civil society organizations, and we've also been witnessing some of the developments within the country. I want to understand, what are you seeing? What are you hearing when you put your ear on the ground?
A lot of excitement. the perspective that I often also advocate, that when we talk about the future of development, it's actually a hopeful future. I think in Rwanda we have seen over many years that problems that many consider insurmountable here are viewed as challenges to be tackled. And sometimes you start with a very big aspiration. Some might even call it a dream or a moonshot. But Rwanda has proven time and again that actually if you put your mind to this, if you also align public policy, partnerships, the private sector, the financial sector, international partners, you can achieve extraordinary breakthrough solutions. So I think what we are seeing in Rwanda today is an economy on an accelerated path towards modernization, towards diversification, and above all, to create an entrepreneurial economy in which innovation can thrive. The growth model, and something that obviously we in UNDP often look at, what is ultimately the purpose of development, of human development, is also to ensure that we leave no one behind. So high growth in GDP figures are good. It's the basis from which to begin to think about, are we bringing everybody along? Sometimes it begins with people with disabilities, for example, which in our society are amongst us in many numbers, but often overlooked. It is about how we can take school leavers and rather than having them knock on the doors of a job market that is not there, create conditions for entrepreneurship, put the financing in place. All of these things, I think, are today part of a vision for development that Rwanda is living literally on the fast lane. And I met with civil society organizations, with private sector leaders yesterday, and this morning also visited another fascinating frontier, the Blue Room, where the new health posts that have been established around the country can in real time monitor exactly what is happening in terms of diseases that are being treated, in terms of gender disaggregation, about who has what kind of profile in terms of disease. We see private sector, technology and public policy coming together to de-risk people's lives, because health diseases are one of the greatest not only threats to our well-being, they are also a reason why people often fall back into poverty. When your father, your mother, your son or daughter fall ill, you use up all the savings you have. Building a more health resilient system like this is not only about better health, it's also about de-risking people's livelihood.